All right, Morning at NTV does continue on with the conversations that concern you and me, especially for people who are into business and have been traveling to particular destinations to, have business relations with different countries. There's also education, to mention but a few. Tourists have also been moving left, right, and center of the world, just so as to see what is the beauty on the other side of the globe. However, some new changes are going to have you reconsider and replan better for some of these opportunities. Understanding the revised U.S. visa policy is our Kickstarter this morning. I am Priscilla Regina Nalwoga. Now, the backbone of it is that the United States has introduced sweeping changes to its visa regime under the presidential proclamation, posing immigration visa issuance for nationals of up to 75 countries that include Uganda. And this was effected on the 21st of January 2026. At the same time, Ugandans now applying for the B1 or the B2 visa, which is either a tourist or a business visa, must now post a refundable bond of up to $15,000 US. So this is a conversation that we talked about earlier on. In January, this marks up to about 56 million Ugandan shillings, while most non-immigrant visas have been reduced to single entry, and this validity is only 3 months. So those of you that have been enjoying 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, that has also been swept under the rug. And so we'll have a better understanding of then how do you operate within the new recommendations. According to the U.S. State Department data, tens of thousands of Ugandans do apply for U.S. visas, and this is on an annual basis. They either apply for tourism or for study or for business or for family visits, to mention but a few. So these changes have raised a lot of concerns from you, Bana Uganda, and the education institutes and other communities at large. So we're privileged to have the Embassy Uganda Consular Chief here with us to help us unpack what this means in high sense and how it gets to affect us, but also how to help us prepare accordingly for these new changes. Tania Romanoff, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, as we pick up this conversation, let's first have a background understanding of the relations that we're having with the United States currently.
Well, I'm really here to talk about the visa policy rather than overall foreign policy.
So in terms of the visa policy, where do we stand as a country?
Okay.
And why did Uganda end up on the 75 countries list?
That's a good list, good question. But although you notice it's a long list of countries, and the list of 75 countries is for people applying for immigrant visas. In other words, people who are planning to live permanently in the United States. And that is actually a pause at the moment while the Department of State is evaluating all of our policies and regulations to make sure that we're doing all the right things in terms of vetting people who are applying for visas before we accept them to travel to the United States. So that, for the moment, is a pause. And that affects actually a much smaller percentage of Ugandan citizens. It's really a quite small number who are applying for immigrant visas. Tens of thousands of people applying every year are usually for non-immigrant visas, the business tourist visas, or study or to work in the U.S.
Okay, so let's talk about the nitty-gritties and the new changes that now people must be very mindful of as they are expressing desire to apply for these particular visas.
Right. So as you mentioned, the biggest change is for the business and tourist visas, the B1, B2 visas, that they now must pay a bond before they travel to the United States, and that can be up to $15,000. And that is refundable. But the one message we want to make sure that people understand is do not pay that before the visa interview. So during the visa interview with a consular officer, the officer, if they decide that you qualify for the visa, then they will provide instructions on how to pay the bond. And then after you pay the bond, we will print the visa and return that to the person so that they can travel to the U.S. Once they depart the United States, our systems automatically show that, hey, they got on a plane and they left the United States, and those funds are returned automatically to the person who deposited the bond.
There's an element of those that get to acquire this nature visa and have paid the bond having to arrive at specific airports in the United States. Why is that so?
The reason for that is to be able to track that someone has entered and left so that we can process the bond appropriately. Currently it's 9 airports and they are hoping to expand it to other airports in the future. But those airports include Boston, Logan, which I know many Ugandans have family and friends connections in the Boston area, of course New York City, Washington, D.C., there's one in California. So it's not particularly restrictive, but hopefully that'll expand in the future as well.
Okay, all right. And on that note, while all these policies and decisions, and I mean they're already now in effect, Ugandans have to abide. There's been a particular question around the payment of the bond. You've talked about one has to first go through the interview, then the interviewer will determine if they qualify. So that element of qualifying and actually getting the visa, that's a loophole of information that people want to understand. So do I pay after being confirmed with a visa, or I pay first and then the visa comes after?
No, please. Well, the visa comes after you pay, but please do not pay before an interview. We need to have the interview to confirm. When I say they qualify, in the past that would have been when we just printed the visa. So now it's just one extra step. We say, okay, you're qualified. I approve you for a visa. Before I can print it, please pay the bond, and then we will print your visa.
Okay, all right. What other changes are people expected to actually adjust to?
Right. I think you mentioned as well the other big change is that most of our visas now are for a single entry and 3-month validity. So we will print the visa close to your travel date. For example, if you interview today, but you're going to your cousin's wedding in August, we will ask you to bring your passport back, perhaps in June or July, to print that visa so that you can go to the event that you wanted to go to. Now, the 3-month validity scares some people, particularly, our students who are in a program perhaps for 2 years or 4 years in the United States. That is just the time in which you have to travel to the United States. You can travel to the United States on the very last day of your visa. And then at the border...
that's the 3 months bracket.
The 3-month, right.
Okay.
So you can travel on that very last day and enter the U.S. on that last day. And then at the border, our Customs and Border Protection officers will tell you how long you're permitted to stay in the United States. Now, for students, it's a special program. They can stay as long as they're an active student. So as long as they're continuing to take a full load of courses at that university, they can stay in the U.S. for 4 years, maybe even 6 or 8, depending what their program is.
And on the case of the student, at what point, because all this now comes down to data and paperwork, just making sure that you're on the right side of the law, especially on the side of the United States. So if I have entered the U.S. on the last day of my 3-month visa, and I'm a student who's there for yet another 3 years, then how am I intended to manage my stay in the U.S. without having to worry about, being poked or looked for?
Now, every university in the U.S. or college has an international affairs office, an international student office, and they will help the student ensure they stay in status and are not violating any laws. So I think it's very important for people to maintain, good relations with that office and perhaps check in with them every semester just to ensure that everything is still above board and, like you said, that they're following the regulations.
Okay, all right. And then I've gone for my sister's wedding. I've entered within the 3 months window. At what point, or what's my validity of staying within the U.S.?
Now, like I said, the Customs and Border Protection officer decides how long you can stay in the U.S. From what I understand, it's anywhere from 1 month to 6 months. They should tell you at the airport when you're getting your passport checked. They don't stamp it in the passport like they used to. So they should be telling you verbally how long you're permitted to stay. And if not, there's also a website where you can put in your name and passport number and confirm how long you are permitted to stay for for your trip to the United States.
All right, so from what we have gathered so far from Tania is that the 3-month visa is simply just the window to which you're supposed to enter the United States, not how long you should stay in the United States, because that's been the blurry line in there. Like, then what's the point of going when I'm paying 15,000 US dollars and I'm just there for 3 months? It doesn't add up, you know, for the bond that they have to pay. So just to have it clear, the 3 months, that's a window for you to enter the US, and then the rest of the conditions that have actually pre-existed before these have been that you can be in the US for up to 6 months.
Correct.
And that is determined at the entry point. All right, thank you so much for that clarity. I trust that it has helped you. Now let's go to the bond itself. Tania, you've been in Uganda, and you know how economy, and you know how, you know, the status of and standing of our people economically. 15,000 US dollars, a refundable bond, thank you very much, but it's significantly higher than our GDP, which is roughly about 1,000 US dollars.
Yes.
So what was the consideration for this determination?
That figure is set on a global standard, and it was set by Washington, D.C. So, you know, people in Malawi who also have to pay a bond have the same amount. So we had no choice in setting what is the dollar amount that was set in Washington. But what we have found is, you know, people have paid the bond. We've only been doing this a few weeks, but we have already issued quite a few visas to Ugandans who have paid the bond. Oftentimes, their contact in the United States will pay that on their behalf. There's nowhere that it says it has to be you personally paying the bond. If there's someone, you know, your company, or, you know, if you're meeting with an NGO in the U.S., they could pay for that on your behalf. Or even if you're meeting family in the U.S., perhaps they can pay that on your behalf.
So in terms of payment, if I don't have that amount of money on me, cash, because we don't know what happens between the interview I have. I don't know if I'm getting the visa or not getting the visa. So upon qualifying for the visa and I don't have that amount of money standing by, what are the considerations in terms of payment window?
Right. We ask people to make the payment within 30 days. So they have, they have some time to organize that.
Okay. On that note, it's a refundable bond.
Correct.
And what qualifies a refund?
So a refund is if you follow all the laws when you're in the United States. And I think, you know, the most important one is, did you depart on time? So if they told you you could stay 1 month and you stayed 3 weeks and then departed, that money will be refunded to you. Of course, there's other ways of breaking U.S. laws that are probably less common, but if you're, if you are, violating other
Tania,
laws.
we can't call them less common because Ugandans may suffer the stroke of those laws. So what are some of those other laws they need to be mindful of? They might be small, but they still can affect their stay.
Yes, exactly. Well, one of the other ones is if people are working and getting paid for working. You know, for example, if you go, and we hear of some people that then go work in a home health care job for several weeks to make some money to pay for their travel. Well, that's not allowed. So if someone is caught doing that, then their bond would not be refunded.
Okay, all right. So that's something that you need to be mindful of. A refundable bond of up to 15,000 US dollars, significantly, of course, higher than Uganda's GDP per capita of roughly 1,000 Ugandan shillings. So that being said, on the immigration visa pause, immigrant visas for the 75 countries are temporarily paused pending maximum vetting that you mentioned earlier on. What does maximum degree of vetting entail in measurable terms?
In that, we don't know yet. So that is being worked out in Washington. They're evaluating, are our systems and our policies thorough enough? And once they've finished that evaluation, they will instruct us, do we need to do something above and beyond what we're doing currently? Okay.
And how does this affect people who, family unification, employment-based immigrants?
So mostly this does affect family reunification. So most of the immigrant visas for Ugandans are, joining, your siblings or your parents or your spouse. So that is the biggest number of Ugandans who would be affected, is family unification.
Yeah. There's also some other unique element that is part and parcel of our living today, social media vetting. Please elaborate on that.
Right, so that is, we're doing social media vetting for students and some of the work visas, so the people who would be staying longer term in the United States. And the concern there is to make sure that people are not any threat to U.S. national security when they enter to the United States. As you know, there are some people here in Uganda, but more importantly, just around the world, who are intending to do something to harm Americans or to harm our country, and that's the reason for the social media vetting, is to just ensure, another step just to ensure that it's safe to allow them to enter the United States.
Okay. On that note, what would the officers be looking for exactly? Just, to hint so that people be mindful, because I will want to travel to the US maybe next year, so I need to now be mindful of my social media presence and activities so that I can be able to position myself to qualify accordingly when the time comes.
Right, right. That's something we really can't give advice on. There's no hard and fast rules of what we're looking for. If there's something concerning, we may call the applicant back in for another interview just to discuss what we found.
So that's what we want to understand. What would determine concerning for the U.S.?
And that's, again, something that would call into question what are they planning to do when they're in the United States, and is it something that might be harming Americans when they enter the United States?
Okay, all right. Could private speech online become grounds for denial?
Not directly. Not directly.
Okay. All right. So what would be your word of caution to people, especially as they're, building up and going on about their social media presence?
Well, it's hard to give advice on what to do in terms of applying for a visa. As a parent, I always tell my young adult children, just be mindful what you put on social media, and other people may be reading it.
Okay. So on that note, just for our viewers' clarity, they may have some clarity on the B1 and the B2 visa, but you do have the H1B, F and M, as well as the J visas. Could you elaborate more on those? Right.
So the F, M, and J visas are all types of student visas. So the vast majority of students are applying for an F1 visa. So that's, say you're going to go for a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in the United States, that's an F visa. The M is more, we don't see as many of them. It's often people studying for airplane pilots or culinary schools, sort of a very specific vocational visa. And then the J1s are so-called an exchanged visa, and those are issued by the U.S. organization that has either accepted you into a program or they're providing the information on that. Okay. The H-1B visas also need to be petitioned for in the United States, and those are skilled labor visas. So someone is a computer systems engineer, for example, sometimes medical doctors or an H-1B. Again, the organization in the United States which has hired you will petition for you and provide information on how to apply for that visa.
Okay, all right. And so on that note, let's talk about the diplomatic relations. Do these visa changes signal any strain between our two countries?
No, the visa regulations are really a global approach to protecting U.S. national security. You've probably seen the news from the United States, and with the Trump administration, this is a very, very high priority to protect U.S. national security and to ensure that the people visiting the country are doing so legally and following U.S. rules and regulations. Those decisions are being made independently from any other foreign policy issues.
Okay, so how can you reassure Ugandans that this is simply an administrative policy, not a diplomatic fallout?
Well, as you can see, when these policies were announced, it was together with other countries. This is taken a long time in coming, the evaluations on which countries are being added to which list, and we're constantly reevaluating Are our screening and vetting sufficient? Is national security protected? And at that point may add or even remove countries from these different lists.
Okay. What is the other thing that you'd like Ugandans to have at the back of their mind regarding this administrative policy as they are expressing interest in traveling to the U.S.?
I think the advice I give to all visa applicants is, number one, be honest. Be true to yourself in the application and during the interview, and be careful who you have help you fill out that application. Ideally, you should do all of this yourself. I do recognize for some people it seems a little complicated to fill out that application online. But our biggest worry in a country like Uganda is that there are going to be these third-party vendors who take advantage of people. And we see that quite often, where the visa application has pure lies in it about their education or what they're planning to do in the United States. And worse, if people bring in fake documents. You know, they say they're going to study and they didn't complete their A-levels and O-levels and bring in fake documents. And that can really get you in trouble because you're breaking both Ugandan and US laws. So, we really advise people to control their application. Ideally, do it yourself or to do it with someone that you trust to ensure that you are honest and accurate.
Okay. On that note, Tania, there's been growing concerns, especially when it comes to the visa interview scheduling. Many people have experienced scheduling that comes after the intended time of travel or the intended event for which they're traveling, and that has definitely caused people to be a little bit,
Right, and we're doing our best to try to bring in as many, open up as many appointments as possible. It looks like we have a very big embassy, but actually our space is quite small. So we are limited in the number of people we can host for an interview in any one day. And we're trying to bring in more people. Right now, I think it's about a 6-month wait time to get an interview. We do have the option to request an expedited interview, particularly for someone traveling for really time-critical business meetings. You're going to purchase some equipment and need to meet with someone in the U.S. Next month, you can request an earlier appointment, or you have an urgent, medical appointment, not for an emergency, not just a checkup, but you have something urgent, you can request an expedited appointment, and we'll try to get you in earlier.
Okay, then let's talk about a Ugandan who's in the United States and their passport expires while they're within still their 6 months, for example, window of staying in the United States.
Right.
What steps are they intended to take to ensure that they can deal with that element? Okay,
so the visa is valid even if your passport expires. You can carry the visa with the new passport. Are you asking about the passport expires or the visa?
The visa.
If the visa expires, well, like we talked about earlier, the visa validity is that window in which you can travel to the United States. If they're not sure how long they're permitted to stay in the United States, there is a website. The Department of Homeland Security has a website, and what I would suggest is they Google I-94, which is the name of the form that they used to give us, or give people that told the date they're authorized to stay. So Google I-94, and you can look online and see how long you're permitted to stay in the United States.
Okay, all right. We do have the 2026 World Cup.
Yes.
The whole world wants to watch this event live, and it's being hosted by the United States. So will there be some special visa facilitation or consideration or leniency for Ugandans who want to travel and people who want to travel from these other 75 countries? There's also, special cases like journalists ourselves, to mention but a few athletes that have to, participate in this. What are the considerations for this?
Right, so there are special visa appointments for people who have purchased tickets to the World Cup directly through FIFA. So if they're purchasing them formally, officially through FIFA, they can get an expedited appointment to come in. We'll get you, I think there's appointments available next week even, in fact. For journalists as well, I would put in an expedite request if there's no appointments. We do want to prioritize sports and recognize that the FIFA World Cup is a very important event for our country and for the world, and are doing all that we can to make sure the people who should go have the opportunity to interview and to get a visa to go.
Okay, Visa Express appointments, do they come at a cost?
No,
They're
they
free
do
of
not.
charge?
Yeah.
Okay, because some people might have an experience where they're being told, no, you have to pay this amount of money for this express appointment.
No. There's no extra cost for the express appointments.
Okay, all right. For the case of the application for the U.S. visa bond, you have hinted quite much about at what point people should pay. So that means that there are potential loopholes or people who might want to milk from the people wanting to apply. How are you averting that scenario so that people are not duped of their money?
And that's part of this information campaign that we're doing, and even talking to people like you, and we've been trying to put the word out on social media. Do not pay the bond before the interview. That's important, and that was one of our biggest fears here, is that people, like you said, people would be duped out of 55 million shillings is a lot of money. Once you have the visa interview, the payment is done through a U.S. government website, pay.gov. Again, people should pay there directly. I would not recommend they give the cash to somebody else to pay on their behalf.
So that's the only payment avenue
that is the only payment avenue
people will go through to
They
pay.
will go through, and we'll give very clear directions. It's a website called pay.gov. But also don't pay until after the interview, because we need to give a little more details, a special link so that they know that it's for a visa for someone from Uganda.
Okay, all right. In terms of payment, US dollars or in shillings?
It's the payment can be through credit card and Venmo and PayPal, I believe. So it's any currency. Yeah.
Is acceptable.
Yeah, it's acceptable.
Okay, all right. Any other measures that you have put in place to ensure that you enable Ugandans uptake this opportunity, in as much as it has come off as stringent for them, but yet it's a good opportunity? Right.
It is. It is a good opportunity. As you know, in some countries we have entirely banned issuance of visas. So I'm fortunate that here in Uganda we can still continue to issue visas, and people are paying the bond, and as long as they continue to follow U.S. visa regulations, I'm confident that we'll continue to be able to issue visas to Ugandan citizens.
Okay. What's your word of caution, and what are the actionable steps that a first-time applicant should be mindful of?
Right. So the first-time applicant, as I mentioned before, must be honest in their application. Who are you? Why are you traveling to the U.S.? What is the purpose of travel? And how are you going to pay for that travel? Try not to listen to someone else who maybe says, oh, you need to have, fake visa stamps or fake, educational documents. Be honest.
For the people who are making applications for the World Cup 2026, are there specific requirements that you need of them to come for those express appointments?
Right. For the express appointments, the only requirement is to purchase the ticket through the FIFA website. Other than that, they still need to qualify for a B1, B2 visa, just like any other Ugandan citizen.
Okay, all right. You've talked about those appointments being open up to next week?
Right, we have them throughout, through May, I believe, through the end of May, so
right.
that people can get to the World Cup on time.
Okay, so just so we are clear, how do I get to make get shortlisted for this express appointment?
When you purchase your ticket from FIFA, from their website directly, they will also provide information how to qualify for those expedited appointments.
Okay, all right. These are very interesting measures that are being described of you, and thank you so much for coming and sitting down with us to elaborate more on these new administrative changes so that people can have a better understanding. As we come into the bend of this conversation, Tania, what's your word of advice, what's your word of caution and call to action for Ugandans at large?
Well, I think, as I've mentioned before, when you apply for a visa, please be honest. And then when you get your visa, please follow U.S. regulations. You know, most importantly, depart the United States on time so that we can, you know, so other Ugandans are not disadvantaged because of other people's behavior. And, you know, that's what we've seen in the past, is because there's a high number of Ugandans who have overstayed their visas, who have been working on B1, B2 visas, that this is why we're in this position we're in today.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Tania, for giving us all this information and trusting that it's been very, very helpful for you to digest. Now you can breathe a little bit. The 3 months window is simply for you to enter the United States, not how long you can stay in the United States. At the entry point is when they determine how long you can stay in the United States, depending on the nature of your visa. And then the $15,000 US is a refundable bond should you actually do everything right and return back to your country of origin within the specified time. Then that is refundable. Speaking of which, just to clarify, the refund is an immediate refund when you exit.
It's within 30 days after you exit.
After
yes.
you exit.
Right.
Okay, all right. So be mindful of that, a refund within 30 days of you exiting the United States and back to your country of origin. That are some of the edification that was needed for you to have at your fingertips, so that you know that you're still eligible to go to the United States, just, you know, making sure that these administrative policies serve both the good of the United States as well as the good of the Republic of Uganda. That brings us to the end of this conversation. For more information, inquiries, you can turn to their social media platforms and their website and be able to contact them directly. And then for us who are going for FIFA 2026 in the United States, please also make sure that you purchase a formal ticket from only an official FIFA website, and then that will give you the qualification to get an expedited visa to go and attend that sporting event. We take a breather.